The alien soldiers laughed at her father's old, rusty gun. Then someone tried to kill their king from so far away that their fancy weapons couldn't reach. What she didn't know when she fired that one perfect shot was that the alien king had been watching her, and he hadn't stopped watching since. The purple blood splattered across Lila's worn coveralls as she scrubbed the marble steps of the Zentari palace for the third time that morning. Her knees ached against the cold stone, but she kept working. In New Terra's hierarchy, human janitors didn't get breaks, especially not during the king's victory parade. "Look at this pathetic creature," sneered Commander Vex, his 4 arms crossed as he towered over Lila. His scaled green skin gleamed under the artificial suns that hung in the dome above the capital city. Still using primitive cleaning tools like her ancestors, the other Zentari soldiers laughed, their clicking sounds echoing off the palace walls. Lila kept her head down, focusing on a particularly stubborn stain. After 15 years of servitude, she'd learned that invisibility was survival. "What's that piece of junk on her belt?" asked Lieutenant Krax, pointing one of his clawed fingers at the battered device hanging from Lila's utility belt. Lila's hand instinctively moved to cover her father's old plasma blaster. The metal was scratched and dented, its chrome finish long faded to a dull gray. The weapon looked ancient compared to the sleek energy rifles the Zentari carried. "That," Commander Vex laughed harder. "That's what these humans call a blaster. Their military used them before we conquered their pitiful planet. Maximum range of maybe 200 meters on a good day." 200 meters? Lieutenant Krax's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Our sidearms can reach 3,000. No wonder they lost the war so quickly." Lila's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. The blaster had belonged to her father, Staff Sergeant Mike Chun of the 101st American Resistance. He died defending the Kansas City stronghold when she was just 12. The weapon was all she had left of him, and of the America that used to exist before the domed cities and the slavery. The ground beneath them began to vibrate with the deep bass of ceremonial drums. In the distance, the parade route filled with millions of Zentari citizens, their colorful scales shimmering like a living rainbow. Today marked 50 years since the conquest of Earth, and King Zorith would ride through the capital to celebrate humanity's subjugation. "Move along, human," Commander Vex kicked at Lila's cleaning bucket. "The king's procession approaches. Your kind isn't permitted to watch." Lila gathered her supplies and started to leave, but the crowd's roar made her pause. Through the massive archway, she could see the royal hover platform approaching, surrounded by gleaming Zentari warriors in ceremonial armor. King Zorith himself stood at the center, his golden scales catching the light, for arms raised in triumph. That's when the world went silent. Not the peaceful quiet of morning, but the terrible stillness that comes before a storm. Every Zentari soldier suddenly froze, their advanced hearing picking up something Lila's human ears couldn't detect. "Sniper!" Commander Vex screamed, his voice cracking with panic. 40,000 meters, northeast tower. 40,000 meters. The words hit Lila like a physical blow. No Zentari weapon could reach that distance. Their most advanced rifles maxed out at 15,000 meters. Whoever was shooting at the king was using technology that shouldn't exist. The Zentari soldiers raised their weapons, but they were aiming at empty air. Their targeting systems flashed red, out of range. Out of range. Out of range. "We can't reach him." Lieutenant Krax's scales had turned white with fear. "He's too far." The crack of the sniper's rifle echoed across the dome, a sound that made every human in the crowd duck instinctively. But King Zorith remained standing, unaware of the death, racing toward him at 3,000 feet per second. Lila's hand moved to her father's blaster without conscious thought. Her eyes tracked the trajectory of the bullet, a skill learned from years of hunting in the Missouri ruins with her dad. The shot would hit the king in exactly 23 seconds. Time slowed to a crawl. She could see Commander Vex's mouth opening in horror as he realized their weapons were useless. Lieutenant Krax was fumbling with his communicator, trying to warn the king's guard. The crowd was starting to scream, as they noticed the panic among the soldiers. But Lila was already moving. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Lila, baby, this old Earth tech might look primitive, but it's got something their fancy weapons don't, Soul. Your great-grandfather carried this in Vietnam. Your grandfather had it in Iraq. I used it in the Resistance. When the time comes, you'll know what to do." She drew the blaster in one fluid motion, her thumb automatically adjusting the power setting to maximum. The weapon hummed to life, its ancient targeting computer synchronized with her movements through muscle memory and countless hours of secret practice in the abandoned subway tunnels. 40,000 meters. An impossible shot for any weapon, human or alien. But as Lila raised the blaster and looked through its iron sights, she saw something the Zentari couldn't understand. The faint heat signature of the sniper's muzzle flash, invisible to their advanced sensors, but clear as day to the simple thermal optics her father had installed decades ago. She pulled the trigger. The blaster discharged with a sound like thunder, a brilliant blue bolt of plasma streaking across the dome faster than the eye could follow. The shot traced a perfect arc through the sky, covering 40,000 meters in less than a second. In the distant northeast tower, a figure in black armor crumpled and fell, the sniper rifle clattering down the building's side. Complete silence fell over the parade route. King Zorth stood unharmed on his platform, still waving to the crowd, unaware that death had just passed inches from his head. But every Zentari soldier, every guard, every citizen was staring at the same thing. A human janitor in dirty coveralls, holding a primitive blaster that had just made an impossible shot. Commander Vex's 4 eyes were wide with shock, and something else, fear. That's not possible," he whispered. Lila slowly lowered the weapon, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the crowd's stunned silence. Steam rose from the blaster's barrel, and she could smell the ozone of discharged plasma. Around her, 1,000 Zentari warriors, the same aliens who had conquered Earth, who had enslaved humanity, who had mocked her moments ago, were staring at her with something she'd never seen in their eyes before. Respect and terror. The inferior human had just done something their superior technology couldn't. And in that moment, everything changed. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before King Zorth's amplified voice boomed across the dome. "Halt the procession." The royal hover platform descended rapidly, its anti-gravity engines whining as it touched down on the marble plaza. King Zorth stepped off with fluid grace, his golden scales rippling with barely contained fury. At nearly 8 feet tall, with for powerful arms and eyes like burning coals, he was a figure that commanded absolute terror and respect. Someone, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, just saved my life with a weapon that should not exist. I want to know who. I want to know how. And I want to know now. The plaza erupted into chaos as thousands of Zentari soldiers began scanning the crowd, their targeting systems sweeping back and forth. But Commander Vex and his unit remained frozen in place, their eyes still locked on Lila. King Zortha's gaze followed their stares, landing on the small human woman who still held the smoking blaster. His 4 eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his royal composure. "You," he pointed directly at Commander Vex. "Bring her to me." Immediately, Commander Vex's scales had shifted to a sickly yellow color, the Zentari equivalent of turning pale. His mandibles clicked nervously as he approached Lila, who was still processing what had just happened. You need to come with us," he stammered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The same soldier who had kicked her cleaning bucket minutes ago now couldn't meet her eyes. Lieutenant Krax stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, how did she—" "I don't know." Vex snapped, his composure cracking. "Their weapons aren't supposed to. This isn't possible." As they escorted Lila toward the king, she could hear the whispers starting in the crowd. The Zentari citizens were pointing at her, their translator devices working overtime to process the impossible event they'd just witnessed. A human made that shot. 40,000 meters. Even our best snipers can't. She humiliated the entire royal guard. How is their primitive technology superior to ours? But not all the voices were filled with wonder. Lila caught darker murmurs from the military ranks. She's an anomaly, a threat to the natural order. If one human can do this, what about the others? This changes everything we know about their capabilities. King Zorith studied Lila as she approached, his massive form casting a shadow over her. Up close, she could see the intelligence burning in his ancient eyes. And something else. Curiosity. What is your designation, human? His voice had dropped to a conversational level, but still carried enough power to make her bones vibrate. Alila Chun, your majesty, she managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. Sanitation worker, class 7. Chun, the king's translator, parsed the name. Chinese-American ancestry. Your file says your father was military. Lila's blood ran cold. Of course they had files on everyone. Yes, your majesty. Staff Sergeant Michael Chun, 101st American Resistance. Killed defending Kansas City stronghold. King Zorith's eyes never left her face. That weapon belonged to him. It wasn't a question. Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. The king extended one of his 4 hands. May I examine it? This was a test, Lila realized. Refuse, and she'd be vaporized on the spot. Comply, and she might survive. She handed over her father's blaster with trembling fingers. King Zorith turned the weapon over in his massive hands, his claws tracing the worn metal. Primitive plasma discharge system. Basic targeting computer. Iron sights, he looked up at her. Maximum effective range listed in our databases as 200 meters. The crowd pressed closer, thousands of aliens hanging on every word. Yet you just eliminated a target at 40,000 meters. His voice rose so everyone could hear. A shot that our most advanced weapons could not make. A shot that saved the life of your king. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "She should be honored. The human saved our sovereign." But the response was immediate and divided. Other voices rose in opposition. "She's dangerous. An aberration. How many more humans possess such capabilities? This threatens everything we've built." Commander Vex stepped forward, his shame evident but his duty clear. "Your Majesty, we had no knowledge of the human's abilities." She was assigned basic cleaning duties. Her psychological profile showed no signs of combat potential. King Zorith's laugh was like grinding stone. "Your psychological profiles, Commander, appear to be inadequate." His gaze swept over the assembled soldiers. This human accomplished what our entire military could not. She acted without hesitation, without orders, without regard for her own safety. Lila felt the weight of thousands of stares, but one in particular made her skin crawl. General Thane, the king's chief military advisor, was watching her with undisguised hatred. His 4 arms were crossed, his scales had darkened to an angry crimson, and his eyes promised violence. She had just humiliated the most powerful military force in the galaxy, made them look incompetent in front of their own people. Some might see her as a hero, but others would see her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. King Zorith handed the blaster back to her, and Lila nearly dropped it in surprise. "Tell me, Lila Chun," he said, loud enough for the entire plaza to hear, "what were you thinking when you took that shot?" The question caught her off guard. She looked up at the towering alien ruler, then at the crowd of his subjects, then at the soldiers who had been mocking her minutes ago and were now staring at her like she was a loaded weapon. I wasn't thinking, Your Majesty," she said honestly. "I just saw someone about to hurt an innocent person, and I had to stop them." The king's eyes glittered with something that might have been approval. But as Lila glanced around the plaza, she saw General Thane lean over to whisper something to his aide. Whatever happened next, her quiet life was over. The question now was whether she would live long enough to see tomorrow. King Zorith raised all 4 of his arms, and the plaza fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried across the dome with the authority of absolute power. "Citizens of the Zentari Empire," he began, his golden scales glinting in the artificial sunlight. "Today we witnessed something extraordinary. Not just an act of incredible skill, but an act of pure loyalty. He gestured to Lila, who stood frozen beside him like a deer in headlights. This human, Lila Chun, saved the life of your king with no thought of reward or recognition. She acted when our own forces could not. General Thane stepped forward, his scarlet scales now almost black with rage. Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to. Silence. The king's voice cut through the general's protest like a blade. I intend to do exactly what honor demands. King Zorith reached into his ceremonial robes and withdrew something that made the entire crowd gasp. The Medal of Valor, the highest honor in the Zentari Empire. Only 12 beings in history had ever received it, all of them legendary Zentari warriors. Lila Chin, the king's voice boomed across the plaza. I hereby bestow upon you the Medal of Valor and name you Royal Protector, with all the rights and privileges therein. The medal was beautiful and terrifying, a crystalline star that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As King Zorith placed it around Lila's neck, she felt its weight both physically and symbolically. It was heavier than her father's blaster. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. A human? A royal protector? This is an abomination. She saved our king. She deserves honor. Humans are servants, not warriors. But the most dangerous reactions came from the military ranks. General Thane's aides were clustered around him, their scales shifting through angry reds and purples. Commander Vex looked like he might be sick. Even his ceremonial guards seemed uneasy, their weapons held a little too tightly. Your Majesty, General Thane's voice was carefully controlled, but Lila could hear the venom beneath it. While we all appreciate this human's fortunate intervention, perhaps bestowing our highest honor on a member of a conquered species sends the wrong message to whom, General? King Zorith's 4 eyes fixed on his military commander with laser intensity. To the citizens who just watched this conquered species save their ruler's life? To the soldiers who couldn't make the shot she made? Or to you? The threat in the king's voice was unmistakable. General Thane bowed his head, but not before Lila caught the murderous look he shot her way. As you wish, Your Majesty, he said through gritted teeth. Lila felt overwhelmed by the medal's weight and the thousands of stares focused on her. This wasn't what she wanted. All she'd ever wanted was to survive, to keep her head down, to honor her father's memory quietly. Now she was standing next to the most powerful being in the galaxy, wearing a medal that marked her as either a hero or a target. Your Majesty, she whispered, leaning closer to the king. I don't want any of this. I just want to go back to my quarters, to my work. I'm not a soldier anymore. King Zorith looked down at her with something that might have been pity. Child, he said quietly, the moment you pulled that trigger, your old life ended. You can't go back to being invisible. Too many people have seen what you can do. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. Around the plaza, she could see Zentari citizens recording everything with their personal devices. Within hours, footage of the human janitor who saved the king would be broadcast across the galaxy. There would be no hiding anymore. But I can offer you protection, the king continued. As royal protector, you'll live in the palace. You'll train with my elite guard. You'll never want for anything. And if I refuse? Lila asked. The king's expression darkened. That wouldn't be wise. You've made enemies today, Lila Chun. Powerful ones who see your existence as a threat to everything they believe about human inferiority. As if to emphasize his point, Lila noticed several high-ranking officers clustered together at the edge of the plaza. They weren't celebrating. They were planning. General Thane stepped forward again, his voice carrying just enough respect to avoid treason. Your Majesty, if you're determined to keep this human close, might I suggest she undergo proper evaluation? We need to understand her capabilities, determine if she's unique, or if other humans possess similar hidden talents. The suggestion sent a chill down Lila's spine. Evaluation meant tests. Tests meant laboratories, and laboratories meant an excellent suggestion, General. King Zorith nodded. But the evaluation will be conducted by my personal staff, not military intelligence. General Thane's scales shifted to an even darker shade. "Of course, Your Majesty." As the ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Lila found herself surrounded by the king's personal guards, massive Zentari warriors whose job was now to protect her. But as they escorted her toward the palace, she caught fragments of conversation from the dispersing military officers. "Can't allow this precedent. Other humans might be equally dangerous. Needs to be dealt with quietly. Accidents happen, even in the palace." The last voice belonged to General Thane. That evening, as Lila sat in her new quarters, a luxurious suite that felt more like a prison than a reward, she stared out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, humans were cleaning floors, serving food, maintaining machinery, all believing they were powerless. But she had just proven that assumption wrong. And that, she realized, was exactly why she was now in mortal danger. The metal hung heavy around her neck, its crystal surface reflecting her worried face. She was no longer Lila Chun, invisible janitor. She was Lila Chun, royal protector, and the most hunted human in the galaxy. In the shadows of the palace, plans were already being made to correct that particular problem. At 0247 hours, the lights in Lila's quarters went out. She jerked awake from a restless sleep, her father's blaster already in her hand. A survival instinct drilled into her during the war years. The palace's emergency lighting should have activated automatically, but the corridor outside her door remained pitch black. That was wrong. Everything about the palace was designed with redundancies. Power failures didn't happen here. Lila rolled out of bed and pressed her back against the wall, trying to control her breathing. In the distance, she could hear the faint hum of the palace's normal operations. Life support, security systems, the ever-present background noise of a building that never slept. But her wing had gone completely silent. The soft scrape of metal against stone made her blood freeze. Someone was picking the lock to her door. Not using an access card, not announcing themselves. Picking the lock with tools, in the dark, while the security cameras were conveniently offline. Professional assassins. The lock clicked open with barely a whisper. Lila raised her blaster, thumbing the power setting to lethal, and tried to remember everything her father had taught her about urban combat. When they come for you, baby, they'll come quiet and they'll come fast. Don't hesitate. Don't negotiate. Just survive. The door opened with surgical precision. No creaking hinges, no rushed entry. 3 figures slipped inside, their movements fluid and coordinated. They wore matte black combat suits that absorbed light, and their faces were hidden behind featureless masks. Even their breathing was silent. But Lila's human eyes, adapted for lower light conditions than Zentari vision, caught the faint heat signatures of their body warmth. She could see them even if they couldn't see her. The first assassin moved toward her bed, some kind of energy blade gleaming in his hand. The second took position by the window. The third guarded the door. Standard kill team formation. Lila waited until the first assassin was committed to his attack on her empty bed before she fired. The plasma bolt lit up the room like lightning, striking him center mass and sending him crashing into the wall. His scream was cut short by the sound of sizzling flesh. The other 2 spun toward her position, but she was already moving. Her father had taught her to never stay in one place after firing. She rolled behind the heavy desk as energy bolts scorched the air where she'd been standing. "Target is armed," one of them hissed in heavily accented Zentari. "Repeat, target is armed and dangerous." Lila's blood went cold. They were using military-grade communication equipment. This wasn't some random assassination attempt. This was a professional operation with support. The assassin by the window fired again, his bolt punching through the desk and missing her head by inches. She could smell burning wood and ozone. These weren't stun weapons. They were using military-grade kill shots. She popped up just long enough to return fire, forcing the window assassin to dive for cover behind her dresser. But the third one was flanking her now, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this many times before. That's when the door exploded inward. "Royal guards, stand down." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Crix, one of the king's personal bodyguards she'd met earlier. But he wasn't supposed to be here. Her quarters were in a different section of the palace, away from the royal wing. The assassin by the door spun to face this new threat, but Crix was already firing. His weapon, a high-powered military rifle, turned the assassin into vapor in less than a second. The remaining assassin by the window made a desperate break for the balcony, but Lila was ready. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Lead your target, baby. Don't aim where they are. Aim where they're going to be." She fired once. The assassin crumpled 3 feet from the window, his black armor smoking. Sudden silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackle of burning furniture and the distant wail of security alarms that were suddenly working again. Lieutenant Crix moved through the room with professional efficiency, checking each body to ensure they were dead. His scales had shifted to a deep blue color that Lila didn't recognize. "Are you injured?" he asked, his weapon still ready. "No," Lila managed, though her hands were shaking. "How did you know to come here?" Crix's mandibles clicked. A sound she was learning indicated discomfort. "I was monitoring the security feeds from my off-duty station. When your section went dark, I knew something was wrong." "Your off-duty station?" Lila studied his face. "You were watching me specifically." It wasn't a question. Crix's blue coloration deepened. "Yes. After this afternoon, I knew there would be retaliation. What you did was brave, but it made you enemies." Before Lila could respond, more guards flooded into the room. The official palace security force, arriving exactly late enough to be useless. Their leader, Captain Zorn, surveyed the carnage with professional detachment. "Assassins," he noted, as if commenting on the weather. "How unfortunate. We'll need to investigate how they penetrated palace security." But as he spoke, Lila noticed something that made her stomach drop. The lead assassin's weapon. She could see it now that the lights were back on. It wasn't some black market energy rifle. It was a palace guard-issue weapon, with serial numbers and everything. She caught Crix's eye and saw that he'd noticed it too. His expression had gone very still. "Captain Zorn," Crix said carefully, "this weapon appears to be military issue." Captain Zorn barely glanced at it. "Stolen, no doubt. Happens all the time." But Lila saw the lie in his eyes. More than that, she saw the calculation. How long had this been planned? How high up did it go? "I'll need to file a complete report," Captain Zorn continued. "The human will need to be relocated for her safety, of course. Somewhere more secure." The way he said secure made Lila's skin crawl. She was standing in a room full of dead assassins, holding a smoking blaster, and the captain of palace security was looking at her like she was the problem that needed solving. Lieutenant Crix stepped closer to her. "Actually, Captain, I believe His Majesty would prefer the royal protector remain in the royal wing, under my personal supervision." The two Zentari officers stared at each other for a long moment, and Lila realized she was watching something much more dangerous than an assassination attempt. She was witnessing the opening moves of a civil war. 3 days after the assassination attempt, King Zorith summoned Lila to the palace's primary training facility. The massive underground complex stretched for miles beneath the royal district, its walls lined with weapons that could level city blocks and training equipment designed for beings 3 times human size. "If someone wants you dead badly enough to breach palace security," the king told her as they walked through corridors filled with his elite warriors, "then you need to become more dangerous than they are." General Thane was waiting for them in the central training arena, surrounded by 12 of his most decorated soldiers. The Emperor's Fist, the most elite unit in the Zentari military. Each warrior stood over 7 feet tall, their scales gleaming with ceremonial battle paint, their 4 arms holding weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. "Your Majesty," General Thane bowed, but his eyes remained fixed on Lila with undisguised contempt. "I've selected our finest warriors to evaluate the human's capabilities." The way he said evaluate made it sound more like an execution. Lieutenant Commander Vask, leader of the Emperor's Fist, stepped forward. His scales were jet black with silver markings, battle scars turned into decorative art. "Your Majesty," with respect, this human barely weighs 100 pounds. My soldiers could break her in half without trying. Then they'd better be careful not to try too hard, King Zorith replied dryly. Begin with basic combat assessment. What followed was 3 hours of the most humiliating defeats the Emperor's fist had ever experienced. The first test was marksmanship. The Zentari set up targets at varying distances, standard military ranges from 100 to 5,000 meters. Lieutenant Commander Vask went first, his precision rifle placing shots within millimeters of the bullseye at every range. His soldiers cheered. Then Lila stepped up with her father's batter blaster. She didn't use the targeting computer, didn't adjust for wind or atmospheric pressure. She just raised the weapon, breathed out slowly, and fired 12 shots in rapid succession. Every target, even the one at 5,000 meters, was destroyed with shots through the exact center. The cheering stopped. Impossible, muttered Sergeant Krex, the unit's demolitions expert. That weapon doesn't have the precision software for shots like that. It doesn't need software, Lila said quietly. It has experience. The second test was close-quarters combat. Lieutenant Commander Vask selected his smallest soldier, still nearly twice Lila's size, for what should have been a quick demonstration of Zentari superiority. Lila put him on the floor in under 30 seconds. She didn't use strength. She couldn't match their forearm power. Instead, she used something they'd never encountered: human unpredictability. Where they expected her to dodge left, she went right. Where they expected her to retreat, she attacked. Her father had taught her to fight dirty, to use speed and intelligence against larger opponents. The Zentari warrior ended up flat on his back, Lila's practice knife at his throat, while his teammates stared in shock. "Ow!" Lieutenant Commander Vass demanded. "Your soldiers fight by the book," Lila replied, helping her opponent up. Sometimes the book is wrong. By the end of the day, she had outperformed the Emperor's fist in marksmanship, tactics, stealth operations, and hand-to-hand combat. Not through superior technology or physical strength, but through human intuition, adaptability, and what her father had called the advantage of being underestimated. The silence in the training arena was deafening. General Thane's scales had shifted to a color Lila had never seen before, a deep purple that seemed to absorb light. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the rage simmering beneath. "Fascinating," he said. "Tell me, human, where did you learn these techniques?" "From my father," Lila replied honestly, "and from staying alive in the ruins after the conquest." "Ah yes, the ruins." General Thane's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "You spent considerable time in the Kansas City wasteland after your father's death, didn't you? With other survivors." Something in his tone made Lila's blood run cold. "I survive alone." "Of course you did," but his expression suggested he didn't believe her. "Still, remarkable skills for someone with no formal military training. Almost as if you'd been prepared." King Zorith, who had been watching the exchange with growing interest, stepped forward. "General, what are you implying?" "Nothing treasonous, Your Majesty. Simply wondering how a janitor acquired such extensive combat capabilities." General Thane's 4 eyes never left Lila's face. "Perhaps our intelligence services should investigate her background more thoroughly." That night, as Lila sat in her new quarters in the royal wing, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Lieutenant Crix had assigned additional guards, but something felt wrong. The walls seemed to have ears. Unknown to her, General Thane was 3 floors below in his private office, speaking quietly into an encrypted communicator. "Yes, I need everything," he was saying. "Financial records, communication logs, movement patterns for the past 5 years. Cross-reference with known resistance cells in the Kansas City ruins." His aide, Major Vren, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, our files show she was always a low-priority target. No criminal associations, no contact with insurgent groups." "Then make some," General Thane replied coldly. "I want evidence of human underground connections, weapons smuggling, communication with off-world resistance movements. Whatever it takes." "Sir, that would mean fabricating." "Major, General Thane's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow sounded more threatening than a shout. This human has just proven that our fundamental assumptions about their species are wrong. She humiliated my best soldiers, made them look like children. Do you understand what that means for our authority? Major Vren's scales shifted nervously. Sir, it means other humans will start to wonder what else they can do. How many more janitors are hiding combat skills? How many more impossible shots are waiting to be fired? General Thane turned back to his computer, fingers flying over holographic displays. This ends now, before it spreads. On his screen, false documents were already taking shape. Communications between Lila and fictional resistance cells, weapons purchases that never happened, meetings with insurgents who didn't exist. By morning, Lila Chun would be transformed from hero to traitor. And this time, not even the king would be able to save her. The ceremony of unity was the most important celebration in the Zentari calendar, a massive gathering held in the Grand Colosseum where representatives from every conquered world came to renew their oaths of loyalty. This year, with Lila's heroic act still fresh in everyone's memory, King Zorith had decided to make her the ceremony's centerpiece. Citizens of the Empire, the king's voice boomed across the packed stadium as millions watched both in person and via holographic broadcast. Today we celebrate not just unity, but the courage that transcends species. Lila stood on the ceremonial platform in her formal royal protector uniform, feeling exposed under the gaze of countless beings from across the galaxy. The Medal of Valor hung heavy around her neck, its crystal surface catching the artificial starlight that bathed the Colosseum. Behind her, the Emperor's fist stood in formation, 12 of the galaxy's most elite warriors now serving as her honor guard. The irony wasn't lost on her. A week ago, these same soldiers had looked at her like she was barely worth noticing. Now, they stood at attention behind the human who had bested them all. Lila Chun represents the best of what unity can achieve, King Zorith continued. When loyalty transcends prejudice, when courage overcomes lies. The voice cut through the ceremony like a blade. General Thane strode onto the platform, his 4 arms raised, his scales blazing crimson with righteous fury. Behind him marched a full company of military police, their weapons drawn. The crowd's celebration died instantly. Your Majesty, General Thane's voice carried across the silent stadium, I bring grave news. Evidence of treachery at the highest levels. King Zorith's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously. General, you dare interrupt. I dare expose a traitor. Thane pointed directly at Lila. This human has deceived us all. The accusation hit Lila like a physical blow. Around the stadium, millions of beings leaned forward to hear every word. Show them, General Thane commanded. The air above the platform shimmered as holographic displays materialized. Communication logs, financial records, surveillance footage. To Lila's horror, they showed her in locations she'd never been, talking to people she'd never met, participating in meetings that never happened. For 3 years, General Thane announced, Lila Chun has been a deep-cover operative for the Human Resistance Network. These are her communications with off-world insurgents, planning the assassination of our beloved king. The fabricated evidence was flawless. Lila watched herself, or someone who looked exactly like her, meeting with shadowy figures in abandoned buildings, exchanging weapons, discussing targets. The audio was perfect, the visual details convincing. The sniper attack was staged. General Thane continued, his voice building to a crescendo. She arranged for the assassination attempt, then heroically stopped it to gain our trust. The ultimate infiltration. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. What had been celebration turned to rage in seconds. Traitor, kill the human. Death to the deceiver. The noise was deafening, a tsunami of hatred washing over the platform. Lila looked desperately toward King Zorith, but his expression had gone cold and unreadable. Is this true? The king asked quietly. No, Lila's voice cracked with desperation. Your Majesty, I swear on my father's grave, none of this happened. I've never seen these people, never been to these places. But even as she spoke, more evidence materialized. Weapons purchases, encrypted messages, video of her supposedly scouting palace security. General Thane smiled coldly. She denies it, as any trained operative would. But the evidence speaks for itself. Lieutenant Commander Vask stepped forward from the honor guard, his black scales now pale with shock. The combat skills she demonstrated. They weren't natural talent. They were professional training. Exactly, General Thane nodded. Every impossible shot, every tactical victory, all preparation for her ultimate mission. The crowd's roar grew louder. Execute her. Execute the traitor. King Zorth stood frozen, his four hands clenched into fists. Lila could see the war raging behind his eyes. The loyalty he felt toward the being who had saved his life battling against the apparent evidence of betrayal. Your Majesty, General Thane pressed, justice demands. That's when Lieutenant Crix made his move. The young officer had been standing guard at the platform's edge, seemingly unnoticed. But as the military police moved to arrest Lila, he suddenly activated a smoke grenade that filled the platform with thick, choking vapor. This way, he shouted, grabbing Lila's arm. Chaos erupted. The crowd screamed as the smoke spread. Military police fired blindly into the clouds. Alarm sirens wailed across the Colosseum. Crix dragged Lila toward the platform's emergency exit, his knowledge of palace security protocols giving them crucial seconds. Behind them, she could hear General Thane screaming orders. Seal the exits. She cannot escape. They burst through the service door and into the maintenance corridors beneath the Colosseum. Crix was already pulling out his emergency communicator. Transport 7, this is Blue Leader. Emergency extraction, protocol 9-inch. Crix, Lila gasped as they ran through the twisting tunnels. Why are you helping me? His scales had shifted to that same deep blue she'd noticed before, a color she now realized indicated absolute loyalty. Because I was there, he panted, his four arms pumping as they ran. I saw your face when you took that shot. No one can fake that kind of instinctive heroism. Behind them, the sound of pursuit was growing closer. More than that, Crix continued. I've been investigating since the assassination attempt. Someone with high-level access planted that evidence. This is a setup. They reached a hidden exit that opened onto the palace's transport bay. A sleek fighter craft was waiting, its engines already warming. As they climbed aboard, Lila turned back toward the Colosseum. Through the smoke and chaos, she could see the massive displays still showing her fabricated crimes to millions of viewers across the galaxy. I have to clear my name, she said, her voice hard with determination. We will, Crix promised, engaging the ship's engines. But first, we have to survive long enough to prove your innocence. As their ship lifted off into the artificial night sky, Lila clenched her father's blaster and made a silent vow. General Thane had destroyed her life with lies, but the truth was still out there. And she was going to find it, no matter what it cost. For 6 days, Lila and Lieutenant Crix hid in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath New Terra's industrial sector. The same tunnels where Lila had practiced her marksmanship as a child. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was back where she started, hunted and desperate, with only her father's blaster for protection. The fabricated evidence is too perfect, Crix said, hunched over his portable computer in their makeshift hideout. Whoever created this had access to military-grade holographic editing software and classified intelligence files. Lila cleaned her blaster methodically, the repetitive motion helping her think. It has to be someone high up in the command structure, someone with clearance for deep intelligence operations. General Thane, Crix said quietly. It has to be. That's when his computer chimed with an incoming encrypted message. Crix's four eyes widened as he read it. It's from Major Vren, he whispered. Tanes Oned. He says he has proof. The message was brief but explosive. Meet me at Maintenance Tunnel 7, Level 5. I have the original files. The human was right. Thane orchestrated everything. But there's more. Much worse. He's planning to finish what the sniper started. Today. Lila felt ice form in her stomach. What does that mean? They found Major Vryn waiting in the tunnel junction, his scales pale with fear and his forehand shaking. When he saw them approaching, he immediately activated a portable data projector. I couldn't live with it anymore, he said without preamble. Look at this. The hologram showed General Thane in his private office, speaking into an encrypted communicator. But this wasn't the conversation about fabricating evidence. This was older, from 3 weeks ago. Yes, the sniper is in position, Thane's recorded voice said. 40,000 meters, just as planned. When King Zorith dies, the military will assume emergency powers. Democracy was always a mistake for a conquered species. Lila's blood turned to ice. He hired the original sniper. It gets worse. Major Vryn continued, his voice barely above a whisper. When you killed the sniper, it ruined his coup. So he decided to frame you and eliminate you both. But the king's protection of you has made that impossible. The hologram shifted to show a more recent conversation from just yesterday. The ceremony was a disaster, Thane was saying to an unseen contact. The human escaped, and the king is beginning to ask questions about the evidence. We need to accelerate the timeline. What's the new plan? The other voice asked. Simple. Tomorrow's memorial service for the fallen guards. The king will be there, along with every major leader in the empire. One plasma grenade, properly placed, and we eliminate the entire chain of succession. In the chaos that follows, the military takes control. The recording continued with chilling details, security protocols that would be accidentally disabled, guards who would be reassigned, escape routes already prepared. He's going to kill everyone, Lila breathed. Major Vryn nodded miserably. The memorial service starts in 2 hours. The king, the royal family, every major political leader, they'll all be in the Grand Colosseum, completely exposed. Crix was already activating his communicator. I'll warn palace security. With what proof? Major Vryn interrupted. Thane controls military intelligence. He'll claim this recording is as fabricated as the evidence against the human. By the time anyone believes us, it'll be too late. Lila stood up slowly, her father's blaster heavy in her hands. Then we stop him ourselves. The memorial service was already underway when they reached the Colosseum. Through Crix's security access, they entered through the maintenance levels, emerging into the upper observation decks that ring the massive arena. Below them, King Zorith stood at a podium surrounded by the cream of Centauri society. Royal family members, planetary governors, military commanders, diplomatic corps, exactly as Thane had planned, everyone important was gathered in one convenient target zone. There, Crix pointed to a service platform high above the ceremony, barely visible in the arena shadows. Movement! Lila raised her father's blaster and looked through its simple magnification scope. Her blood froze at what she saw. General Thane crouched on the platform, a military-grade plasma grenade launcher in his forehands. The weapon was aimed directly at the royal podium, its targeting computer calculating the optimal blast pattern to eliminate everyone below. Range? She asked quietly. Crix checked his scanner. 45,000 meters. Lila, that's even farther than. Then the shot that started all this, she finished. She took a deep breath and settled into her firing position. My father always said the universe has a sense of irony. Below, King Zorith was speaking about the courage of the fallen guards, about how their sacrifice embodied the highest ideals of the Empire. He had no idea that death was locked onto him from the shadows above. Lila could see Thane's finger tightening on the launcher's trigger. She exhaled slowly and fired. The plasma bolt traced a perfect arc across the massive space, covering 45,000 meters in less than 2 seconds. It struck General Thane center mass just as he was pulling the trigger, spinning him away from the launcher and sending him tumbling from the platform. The grenade launcher clattered down into the arena, its unfired weapon landing harmlessly on the ceremonial stage just feet from King Zorith. For a moment, the entire Colosseum was silent. Then the king's voice boomed across the arena. Seize him! Royal guards swarmed the fallen general, who was still alive but badly wounded. As they dragged him before the king, Thane's scales had turned the sickly yellow of defeat and terror. Ew! King Zorth's voice carried absolute authority as he looked up toward Lila's position. Show yourself. Lila stepped into view, her father's blaster still smoking in her hands. The crowd gasped as they recognized the traitor who had just saved their lives. Explain, the king commanded, his 4 eyes fixed on General Thane. Thane tried to speak, but Major Vren was already broadcasting the recorded conversations across the arena speakers. The general's own voice filled the space, admitting to hiring the original sniper, planning the coup, fabricating evidence against Lila. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous and deafening, but this time, the roar was one of vindication, not condemnation. 2 impossible shots. 2 times the inferior human had saved the king when his own military could not. And this time, everyone knew exactly who the real traitor was. King Zorth's judgment was swift and absolute. General Thane, his voice echoed across the silent Colosseum. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, and crimes against the crown. How do you answer? Thane, his scales now a sickly gray of defeat, could only hang his head as his own recorded voice continued to play through the arena speakers, damning evidence of his coup attempt broadcast to millions across the galaxy. I acted for the good of the Empire, he whispered, his 4 arms shackled before him. Humans are a threat to our natural order. This one proves it. King Zorth's laugh was like grinding stone. This threat has now saved my life twice, while you, my most trusted general, tried to murder me twice. His 4 eyes blazed with controlled fury. Tell me again about natural order. The king stood, his golden scales catching the arena lights as he addressed both the crowd and the billions watching across the empire. Citizens, we have been blind. We conquered humanity, believing them inferior, weak, primitive. But what we mistook for weakness was restraint. What we called primitive was actually refined. He gestured toward Lila, who stood in the royal box with Lieutenant Crix and Major Vren, her father's blaster still in her hands. This human made 2 impossible shots that our most advanced technology could not make. She did this not with superior weapons, but with superior heart. While our own general plotted murder, she acted with courage. While our military failed, she succeeded. King Zorth turned back to the condemned general. For your crimes against the crown and the empire, I sentence you to immediate execution. The sentence was carried out within minutes. General Thane, the being who had orchestrated everything from the original assassination attempt to the fabricated evidence, was vaporized by royal decree. His death marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Citizens of the Empire, King Zorth continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy, today we correct a 50-year mistake. I hereby declare the immediate emancipation of all human slaves. No longer will they serve as janitors and laborers. They are now full citizens of the Zentari Empire, with all rights and privileges thereof. The announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd. In the arena, alien diplomats whispered urgently to their aides. Across the galaxy, human slaves stopped working to stare at broadcasting screens in disbelief. But the king wasn't finished. Furthermore, I hereby establish the Human Integration Corps, a new military branch that will train and deploy human soldiers alongside our traditional forces. Their unique capabilities, as demonstrated by Royal Protector Chun, represent an untapped strategic resource. He raised all 4 arms toward Lila. Lila Chun approached the throne. The walk across the arena felt like miles. Every eye in the Colosseum was fixed on her, the same beings who had called for her execution just days ago. But now their expressions had changed from hatred to something approaching awe. At the royal platform, she found a sight that would have been impossible to imagine a week ago. Commander Vex and his entire unit, the same soldiers who had mocked her primitive blaster, were kneeling in formal salute. Your Majesty, Commander Vex said, his voice thick with emotion. "I formally request permission to serve under Royal Protector Chen's command. My unit has learned humility from her example." Behind him, Lieutenant Krax nodded vigorously. "She taught us that true strength isn't about having the biggest weapon, but knowing how to use what you have." King Zorith smiled, a rare expression that transformed his fearsome features. "Granted, Commander. In fact, I'm placing Royal Protector Chen in charge of the new human integration program. Who better to bridge our species than someone who embodies the best of both?" Lila looked out at the arena, at the thousands of beings who had once viewed humans as nothing more than useful animals. Now, they were cheering for her, for the changes she represented. In the crowd, she spotted human workers, former slaves who had been brought to witness the ceremony. Their faces showed wonder, hope, and something else, pride. For the first time in 50 years, they could hold their heads high. "Speech," someone called from the crowd. "The human hero must speak." King Zorith gestured for silence, then nodded to Lila. The arena fell quiet enough to hear a pin drop. Lila stepped to the podium, her father's blaster hanging at her side, no longer a symbol of humanity's defeat, but of their hidden potential. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the vast space. "A week ago, I was nobody," she began. "A janitor cleaning floors, invisible to everyone around me. But my father taught me something before he died, fighting for our freedom. He said that inside every human heart beats the spirit of those who came before us. Soldiers, pioneers, dreamers, people who never gave up, no matter how impossible the odds." The crowd listened in complete silence. Today proves that strength isn't about the size of your army or the power of your weapons. It's about standing up when standing up matters most. It's about doing what's right, even when you're afraid. She raised her father's blaster, scratched, dented, and supposedly primitive. This weapon saved a king, not because it was advanced, but because it was wielded by someone who cared more about protecting life than preserving power. The arena erupted in cheers that could be heard across the city. As the celebration continued around her, Lila stood tall on the platform, where she'd once been condemned as a traitor. The Medal of Valor caught the light at her throat, and her father's blaster rested easy in its holster. She thought about the moment that had started it all, one impossible shot fired by an invisible janitor who just wanted to save a life. That single act of courage hadn't just changed her destiny. It had changed the galaxy forever. And in the distance across the domed cities of New Terra, humans stood a little straighter, looked their alien neighbors in the eye, and remembered what it felt like to be free.